Hey, what's up? Kyle Winjack here. I just made it back to Vancouver from LA. I spent the last 6 weeks there, and while I was there, I bought Ari Herstand's new edition of his book, How to Make It in the New Music Business, and started checking it out on the plane. I read the first few chapters, and it's really great. I've listened to most of his podcast episodes and read the last book too. And partly for my own benefit, I decided to sort of just do uh, a bit of a recap of what was in the intro in the first chapter. And as I continue to read and study the book, I'll post more of these, and I'll post a link if anybody's interested in checking out the book. And for the rest of these, I'll probably shoot them in my studio with with a proper microphone and everything. But just getting settled back in here in Vancouver and working with what I got. So he kind of starts it off with this preface about what's changed since the last edition, which if you've read the previous versions of the book before, it's nice to know like what's new, what's been updated. So there's a section on the post-COVID sort of landscape. I guess I mean the entire book is sort of adapted to fit the new world that we're living in, I suppose you could call it. And within that, one of the major things that's changed in the digital realm and social media is TikTok has become like a huge thing. There's a bunch of artists blowing up on that. So later on in the book, there's a whole section on TikTok and on live streaming and on cryptocurrency as well. So I haven't read any of that yet, but it's you know it's in there. Then he goes on to sort of talk about his backstory, like how he got into the music business in the introduction, and I won't like kind of go into too much detail there. You can read it if you want, if you pick up the book. But I think it's just cool to know that it's coming from somebody who like gets it. He's an indie musician himself and kind of like figured out a lot of those things. It's not like some corporate bigwig from a major label. So yeah. So that's the introduction, and then once you get into the actual first chapter, early on he's talking about authenticity and how you know it's just like really important to like be yourself on stage and present yourself in your art. And actually, in Ari, he did like a podcast, a live podcast recording with Theo Katzman from the band Wolfpack, and we got to hang out a little bit after, and he was talking about how if you succeed at something without being authentic, it's actually kind of a curse because then you're sort of like locked into that because you've had success with it, but you don't like it. And yeah, he was talking about how before like Wolfpack and his solo project really kind of took off, um, he was writing a lot of like pop songs for different artists, trying to kind of like crack top 40. And there's nothing wrong with that, but for him, that just like wasn't his thing. And he kind of just decided that he hated it. And he's like, screw this, I'm just going to make music with my friends. And people loved it. It was, Wolfpack is huge now. They sold out Madison Square Garden. So, yeah, authenticity. I mean, I think that in some ways you can be successful without authenticity, but it's kind of like a quick fleeting thing and it's probably not going to be as fulfilling. So, that's why we're all musicians, is to sort of like pursue something that is, you know, an authentic reflection of how you see the world, how you feel. And yeah, there's a line that Ari puts in there, and I'm paraphrasing, but it's something like, artists are looked to like reflect truths, and it's cool when you can like connect with somebody and reflect something that they've always felt but can never like articulate. And if your music can like help them feel connected to that and be like, oh, somebody else feels that way too, then that's something really special. So yeah, there's a cool quote in there by Oak Felder that says, the only difference between success and failure is whether or not you stop. And he goes on to just talk about perseverance, and that making it in the music industry is really freaking hard, so you're gonna need a lot of that. The next sort of major point is the definition of making it, because a lot of people think of like the glamorous rock style or rock star lifestyle rather. And that could be your definition of making it. That's cool, but you know, maybe you just want to be able to support yourself from your original music, and like you could do that off of like 60 grand a year and you'd be happy doing that. That's fine too. And there are a lot of ways that you can realize that as well. You don't necessarily have to be the center of attention. There's lots of ways that you can make that work behind the scene, and you've still made it as long as you're doing what you want to do. And yeah, I think for me, that's the most important thing. In Ari's podcast, he asks every guest at the end of the episode, the last question is always, what does it mean to you to have made it in the new music business? So a lot of people have really great answers for that. Next, he talks about major labels and how 98% of the artists that are signed to major labels fail, meaning that they never recoup the cost of the investment that the label gives them. Because it's a loan. You can think of the label like a bank where they're giving you a bunch of money up front to record your album, and you have to pay that back before you see any more of the profits. And even after you pay them back in full, they still own on average about 82% of your music essentially. So it's not a great deal. And the good news is that you can kind of do it yourself now. You don't need a major label, and also there's a couple reasons that we'll get into in a minute that labels are now offering more artist-friendly deals, but you have to sort of prove yourself first. And once you get to the point where you don't need a label, that's usually when they come knocking. So it used to be that major labels would have people who would go out and try to discover talent, and then they would have budgets that would go towards developing them. But now, because the internet has kind of leveled the playing field to a certain extent, you can create a buzz on your own, and unless you've done that, they're not interested. They just kind of want to throw some money at something that's already proven, that already has a dedicated fan base. So if you don't have tens of thousands of followers on social media, and you don't have millions of streams already independently, then they're not going to be interested in further investing in that. And if you're in that situation where you've already got like a solid career going, or at least some momentum in your music, and at that point you might be offered a deal, and it could be a good thing because they can offer a lot more money and resources than you would probably have at that point, and that could propel your career to the next sort of phase. But it's up to you at that point whether you want to engage in that. Next, he goes on to talk about having a day job to support your like the initial sort of phases of your career, because you need to eat. But he kind of he's got some pretty hot takes on that. I think at least he talks about how you should try to get a job that doesn't like a mindless job that you can just sort of do and leave it at work, and that way when you're home, you're just using your body at work, not your mind, and you can save that sort of creative energy for working on your music, which makes sense to me. And he also says that if you're offered a promotion, you should turn it down, which is maybe an extreme stance, but honestly, I kind of agree with that, because you're offered a promotion, maybe it's more money, it's definitely more responsibility most of the time, and you can kind of get sucked into that corporate world, and it's like, oh, okay, you're kind of seeing the advancement of your career path there, and you'll eventually probably abandon the artistic things that you want to do. And yeah, if you have a backup plan, you will definitely use it, because it's quite hard to make it in any of the arts. I think music especially, but yeah, it is very possible. I've done it for most of my life. I haven't starved yet. I'm definitely not where I would like to be eventually, but it takes a lot of work. So if you have an easy way out, then you're just setting yourself up to take that route. He also talks about how cover gigs and like corporate gigs, a lot of people call them jobbing gigs. You should treat those like a day job, which kind of makes sense to me. And there's nothing wrong with doing those. They can pay really well, and I've done a ton of those. I've made a living off of doing that primarily, along with teaching. Occasionally, I've had other like short-term day jobs and stuff like that, but you know, mostly through the wedding band circuit and busking sometimes, and just playing various kind of cover gigs. But that's not really what this book is about. It's more for somebody who wants to pursue a career in original music. So if that's your goal, to just kind of like be a session musician and play your sort of local cover circuit, then maybe this book isn't for you. But if you have loftier goals on top of that, maybe it includes that as a stepping stone, but you should sort of treat it as a day job, and eventually you can kind of scale that back and quit doing that altogether and just take the gigs that are really artistically fulfilling for you. It's cold here. I wish I was still in LA. So the next part is he talks about goal setting and the 26-year marathon, he calls it. So the idea is that you set 6 months goals, 1 year goals, 3 year goals, and 26-year goals. Not just any goals, though. They have to be what's called SMART goals, and I think he pulled that from some other like business book, and he did credit it, but I didn't write it down, so I don't know where it came from. But the SMART goals stand for specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time-bound. Write that down and go through your 6 month, 1 year, 3 year, and 26 year, and then review that every 6 months, see the kind of progress that you've made, and you can always adjust things because your priorities change and your goals will naturally adapt around that. But yeah, so I did that exercise, and I think having goals for me always like kind of helps align what I'm doing in my day-to-day life to try to get a little bit closer to that. And even if I don't achieve the goals, I find that I get more accomplished than I would have if I didn't have the goals. So yeah, specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time bound. I'm not sure what the difference between achievable and realistic is really, but it wouldn't be as good of an acronym without it. So that's probably where that's coming from. And then he talks about having a story that goes along with your music and how you naturally have a story, because you've lived a unique life that nobody else has lived, and people they connect with the music, but they also want to connect with the person and sort of where they're coming from. So yeah, like the culture around the music is sort of just as important as the music itself, or it can at least add to that. And then the last chapter, or the last section rather, in the first chapter is he sort of talks about age and how he lists like a bunch of people who kind of had like late starts or whatever. Like Louis Armstrong had his biggest hit. I mean, he was already big at this point, but he had his biggest hit in his like 60s, I think he was. And then he talks about a bunch of people who like didn't make their first album until they were like 30 or 40. And I'm sure there are examples of people who have like started a music career at like 80 years old, and probably wasn't the longest career, but they saw some level of success. I feel like that first chapter was kind of a bit of a potpourri, just a bit of like overview of different things and kind of just like general advice, and yeah, it was good stuff to read. But then the later chapters are a little bit more specific, where it kind of gets into the nuts and bolts of different topics, everything from royalties to booking tours to getting sync placements, or applying for festivals and performing arts centers, and everything that you can imagine, basically, that the indie music career sort of revolves around. So yeah, hopefully some people find this interesting and useful. I'm going to keep doing it. even if nobody's watching, because it's just, it's good for my own retention of this. But if you did enjoy it, let me know. Leave a comment, thumbs up, all that good stuff. And you can check out Ari's website and socials. I'll link all that as well. All right, until next time, Kyle and Jack, peace.